Start recording. Hello, welcome to Tuesday afternoon and the beginning of the UTC Marathon. No more days off until until Thanksgiving. And I've been told that we still don't know what the schedule is going to be for final exams, except that we end all classes on the week before Thanksgiving. We go to Thanksgiving, we're not coming back to any live classes. So what we do on this class, I have it left for the Tuesday, Thursday afternoon at this time during finals week, and it'll be a test just like the one we have already. Welcome to it. Still working on the essays, about halfway through. Again, grades are pretty good, so you can breathe after the test. Couple of hundreds. 100 I say for somebody who does extra work, and a couple of you have. And I really appreciate the effort. And the one issue that has come up is things like clocks. Clocks is not a medium. And if you have something iffy like a painting, the answer is it depends. Look at our definition of media, and that will help you decide. So that's the one issue with those. This week, we will have, since we have no major projects, I will post on Thursday, after the Thursday class, a very short one question little test, 5 points, something that should be easy just to get you engaged with the material and to watch the recordings. So it'll be something pretty straightforward like I did last time, but it's possible not to get the points. So anyway, I'll do that Thursday, and that'll be it for this week. So that's what's going on. Anyway, I will now, it's interesting, by the way. I sit with meetings with other faculty members and whatnot. We're putting together next spring's schedule, and I know we have a section of this class is asynchronous, and we're getting lots of complaints that we just post something and it goes into the ether. They want us to have more live classes and synchronous classes, and I'm going to try. Anyway, so that's what's going on. Okay, here is what we have. We have the PowerPoints posted, and when I do the recordings, I put them in as an announcement and as an email, so you'll get them. Today, if you remember, we left the history at the Dark Ages and everything, literacy went dark, and civilization, we had plagues and all sorts of stuff happening, but things start to rebound, as does the media. But here's where we were.
Meet Janus, the Roman pleb, and John, the medieval peasant. Janus lives in a 4-story apartment building in the sprawling city of Rome. John lives in a thatch hut in one of the hundreds of tiny villages scattered around medieval Europe. Janus went to school. He can read and write. Right now, Janus is using this skill to draw lewd graffiti. But if he so desired,
and I was at the Parthenon, I showed you pictures, they really do write curse words. There is a lot of ancient curse words floating around.
He had access to thousands of pieces of literature from all over the empire at one of Rome's many libraries. John doesn't even know what a school is, let alone a library. He's only ever heard of one book, the Bible.
Mhm.
And at any rate, the only person in the village who can read is the priest. Janus starts his day off with a trip to the baths, where he soaks in the hot tubs, and then has a drink of water from a nearby fountain. John hasn't had a bath in months. In fact, he's fairly certain that baths are sinful, though he's not sure why. The closest thing John has to running water is a nearby stream. Janus spends his day off attending one of Rome's many festivals. He catches the first play of an annual theater competition. From there, he heads to the horse races at the Circus Maximus. Tired of the ponies, Janus wanders around the market.
By the way, they noticed the playbill from A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which really was a Roman comedy that they brought back in the 1960s. So yeah, they had very modern culture. But then you hit the Dark Ages.
Where he touches silk from China, tastes olives from Greece, sees paper from Egypt, and smells spices from across 3 continents. Janus finishes his day watching a nice gladiatorial fight at Rome's massive stadium, the Colosseum. John spends his day off attending church. After services, there'll be a market day, oh boy, with peddlers and storytellers and maybe even a maypole. John hopes the peddlers bring some more apples from the village next door, but no such luck. The peddler caravan got waylaid by bandits. No market today. Poor John. How do we explain this disconnect? Janus lived at the height of the Roman Empire, around 100 CE.
See, shows you the difference. That the media was a huge, huge part of that, because the Romans were able to read, they were able to know about drama. Some of you have used drama in your essays. They had things they could read. The only thing you had in the Middle Ages was the Bible. Nothing wrong with that, and we showed how the Bible kept Western civilization alive. Anyway, so that's where we were. Things got a little bit more cohesive. If you remember, Charlemagne's grandfather beat the Arabs at the Battle of Tours, and that stopped the Arab invasion. Then the Normans come in from France. Norman means Northman. They were Vikings who were in France, and they came in and they took over the throne of English. Why that matters? French and Anglo-Saxon mixed together to make the modern English language starts developing in the early Middle Ages. Before then, they spoke mostly German. In England and on the continent, you had people reading Latin and Greek and assorted other languages, and the only thing that everyone agreed upon was the Latin Bible. Some people used paper, and that's a good thing, because papyrus, we talked about before, wasn't as durable and fell apart, a little harder to make. Parchment is animal skin. So paper was invented in China, but spread to the West. The big thing happens is the Crusades. Ta-da!
In Europe, the Middle Ages was a time period that spanned from around the 5th century until around the 15th century. This is a time considered between antiquity, think of the ancient Romans and Greeks, and modern periods. The Middle Ages can be divided into 3 separate time periods: the early Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, and the Late Middle Ages. For this lesson, we will focus on how people learned and were taught during the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages lasted from the 11th century through around the end of the 13th century. During this time period, crop production increased quickly because of some new technology. Agricultural advances led to an increase in the population of Europe. Also during this time, a military campaign pushed Christians to gain control of the Holy Land from the Muslims. Fighting occurred at intervals for years. These holy wars are known as the Crusades. In large part because of the Crusades, the High Middle Ages also experienced a rediscovery of classical knowledge. When using the term classical, we are generally referencing ancient Greece, especially.
Yep, remember they had Janusz the peasant there living in a dirty hovel. Well, the nobles went back to the Middle East, and what did they find? The library at Alexandria. They found Ptolemy and Socrates and Plato and navigation and the number zero, all sorts of things that they did not have in an algebra. Algebra is an Arabic word, algebra. So they brought back all of this stuff, their own history, which was stored in the Middle East by the Arabs. So the Christians bring back their own culture, which they lost, back from the Middle East.
Ancient Greek scientists or philosophers like Aristotle. People living in ancient cultures were curious. They wondered about the stars and the human body. They developed mathematical practices. People who lived near the Mediterranean Sea, like the Greeks, studied mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Essentially, they were studying wisdom. Romans wrote about literature, history, and politics. One of the most important means of preserving and spreading knowledge was the development of paper and books. Text was originally kept on stone tablets, but eventually parchment was developed. Parchment was made from stretched animal skin. Early books made from this material were expensive. In the 8th century, Asians developed a cheaper writing material, paper. Creating paper became popular and spread through Africa and Europe. Books became more accessible and more abundant. Prior to the 11th century, knowledge in Western Europe was somewhat limited.
Yeah, remember we showed last time St. Columba writing by hand Bibles on parchment? Not too many around. And as you saw, only the bishops and priests had access to it. So there was no media or literacy. Then we start having paper and books and ideas. Not just what the priest and the Pope says, but what Plato and Aristotle says. Different ideas. And different ideas make people think and make, as we see even today, make people fight.
Many books and manuscripts were being preserved by the church.
Okay. It cuts off there, but you see the point. A little bit more. What we got out of the Crusades. Gives it a second to load.
My F-150 is working even when I'm not, with an available max payload of 3,270 pounds and max towing of 13,200 pounds. It's nice to know I have a truck I could count on.
Back to the
Ford
market.
F-150.
The Crusades were first and foremost an expression of papal authority against the enemies of the church.
The First Crusade was preached by a pope, Pope Urban II, in France in the year 1095. With reference to the Muslims and their advance in Europe and in Jerusalem, I think the Christians in Europe believed that the Islamic message of Muhammad was against and contradictory to what the Christians were saying. They were worried that this idea could possibly overrun the Christian idea.
Pope Urban conceived this idea. It's not a sin if you kill non-Christians, if you kill non-believers in our faith. And so he made this deal that if you go and fight in the Holy Land, you will be forgiven all your past sins. And Knight could sin as much as he liked. And simply by going to the Holy Land, he had been given his passport to heaven. And that was an extremely attractive deal. And combined with that, he could win fame, he could win glory, and he could come back with the treasures of the Near East. These are the things that drew knights in their tens of thousands to go on crusade.
when you think about the brutality of the Crusades, you think about what was done to the people that were there, this just flies in the face of what the Christian message is all about.
Remember that these guys embrace the same God, many of the same beliefs, same prophets, and yet the streets ran deep with their blood. It shows the extraordinary power of ideas to take hold of people.
And two different books, the Christian Bible and the Islamic Quran.
People's minds and drive them to commit acts of great sacrifice and love on the one hand, but also acts of tremendous barbarity and hatred on the other. It's the double-edged sword of religious belief.
The bloodletting of the Crusaders spread throughout the Islamic lands. Everybody heard stories about the massacre of unarmed individuals. It created this intense rage amongst Muslims. In a sense, it resulted in a new kind of Muslim crusade, a desire to raise an army to go back to liberate Jerusalem from the Crusaders as an act of piety on the part of Muslims.
I don't think any of those young men, either Christian or Muslim, could possibly have imagined that their struggle could possibly still be playing itself out 1,000 years later
But it is.
in the area that we call the Middle East today.
So yeah, two books based on the same original Old Testament, two different cultures who had been fighting already for 1,000 years, and it's still going on. But because the cultures are so similar, the Crusaders brought back not just relics, but they also brought back ideas. They brought back history and mathematics and philosophy and different ideas than you might be hearing in your local church. Hello. Okay. Meanwhile,
Because your passion never runs out, you deserve monthly income that does the same. In over 100 years, we've never missed a payment. Guaranteed monthly income for life when you retire.
skip ad, come on.
During the early Middle Ages, any type of higher education was usually only available in monasteries and cathedral schools, where Christian monks and nuns taught each other and preserved the writings of classical authors. By the 11th century, medieval Europe was becoming more urban and complex, and royal governments needed highly trained men to run their bureaucracies. Students and teachers were also demanding better ways to be educated, and the solution to this came about with the creation of universities. Universities come from the Latin word universitas, which means guild, and these schools were essentially groups of students and teachers who got together into their own groups for the purposes of learning. In some universities, it was the students themselves who paid the teachers and ran the institution. The main curriculum was based on 7 areas: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy, all of which were important for a cleric in the Catholic Church. In some universities, other subjects were also important. That is, Salerno was renowned as a place to study medicine, and Bologna was known for law. By the 12th and 13th centuries, universities were becoming important centers.
But they're not just reading the Bible anymore. They're bringing back mathematics and history and literature from the Middle East. And different people had different ideas. And that can cause some trouble.
Centers of learning, and some would become quite famous, like Oxford and Cambridge in England, and the University of Paris in France. In the later Middle Ages, universities would emerge in most other parts of Europe too, as monarchs and cities wanted them as sources of highly skilled bureaucrats and to increase their own reputations. Occasionally, though, the relationships between university students and their local communities could get hostile.
Surprise.
And since students were treated as clergy, it meant that they could not be tried by local courts for crimes, only in the much more lenient ecclesiastical courts. While very few medieval men and no women could be part of a university, the institution did develop and grow throughout the Middle Ages and became home to some of the period's greatest thinkers, such as Peter Abelard and Thomas Aquinas.
And Peter Abelard's consort, his favorite student, was a woman named Heloise. And he was a priest, so he couldn't get married, but they were together and they wrote together, and she was the smartest person. And he let her teach classes, and she was about the smartest person around, and they wrote books together. And because she was a female person, not everybody liked Peter Abelard. So they beat him up, did bad things to him, locked him up in jail, and locked her up as a nun. And that's the Middle Ages.
The university has since become the standard of higher education, not just in Europe, but throughout the world. To learn more about medieval education.
But the idea that all of a sudden you have different ideas coming in from the Middle East, and people reading the Quran, and people like Heloise, women people, Black people, all of a sudden, not everybody's comfortable with different ideas. And then just as we have this boiling point, things fall apart again. What actually happened, climate change. It got cold. They called it the Little Ice Age for whatever reason. And the crops failed. The plague came in. But you can't stop ideas. People were still reading. You still had the universities bringing in different ideas. Over that time too, since we're speaking English, modern English develops. We still read Geoffrey Chaucer, who English became a thing of both an amalgam of French and German. So all sorts of things are happening. At the same time, we still had trade with the Arabs and the Muslims until also at this time, because climate change, a group of Turks move in from Central Asia into what's now Turkey, and they're not as friendly with the Europeans as the previous Arabs. And then they take down Constantinople and cut off all trade. So all of a sudden you're getting all of these ideas and then you're cut off. What other things started happening in the 1400s? Anybody? Can't go to the Middle East anymore. 40 years after this happens, Columbus decides to go the other way. The Portuguese go around South Africa to India, and Columbus goes in the other direction because all of a sudden the trade routes are shut. And then, about the same time, we have the invention of the printing press, generally agreed upon as the most important invention of the Middle Ages and the end of the millennium and the end of the Middle Ages. Why do you think the printing press was such a big, hairy deal? Anybody? You can chime in. Yeah, I see a hand raised. Unmute yourself or I'll unmute you. Okay. Okay.
Oh, I was unmuted.
Okay. You were saying, yes.
As I was saying, was it because history could finally be documented on paper
Right.
and stored in archives?
Mm-hmm. All of a sudden you have, right.
And then, of course, there's
you have many people who can read that history. It's not just your kings and your priests. So that's a big deal. Other things. Well, hello. A big one is that if you have more books, even though it's just the Bible, more people can read it on their own. What difference does that make? Because this makes a very big deal. If you can read your own Bible rather than just listen to what the priest says, what difference does that make?
Democracy.
Absolutely. You could look up there and say, hey, he's saying, and this is exactly what Martin Luther did. He's saying, hey, you can buy your way into heaven. It's called an indulgence. You pick up the Bible, it's not in the Bible. That's just something that the Pope made up to make some money. And all of a sudden, regular folks who could read, they could have their own ideas and not just what the priest says or the government says. You have your own ideas. And having your own ideas rather than just doing what you're told changes everything.
There is a huge fundraising deadline coming up for Senate Democrats, and they need your help right now.
Don't blame me for that. I try to be
One-off,
nonpartisan.
but for most people in the Middle Ages, this was an academic problem. They couldn't read or write anyway. During the Middle Ages, books were written out by hand, mostly in monasteries. Often the monks would spend years on a work. Then, in 1450, an invention changed the world. In the German city of Mainz, Johannes Gutenberg invented the technique of printing with movable type. This made it possible to duplicate books in large numbers and at relatively low cost. The technological foundation was laid for the intellectual, political, and religious changes of the succeeding centuries. Johannes Gensfleisch, who later changed his name to Gutenberg, was born in Mainz in around 1400. His father was a wealthy merchant. Young Johannes attended the monastic school in Mainz. That much we know. But then his trail goes cold for a while. We only pick it up again in Strasbourg, where he settled in 1434. Here he set up a factory that produced mirrors for pilgrims. These were very popular among the faithful, who hoped thereby to capture something of the charisma emanating from the shrine they were visiting and from the relics it contained. For Gutenberg, it was a lucrative business. There was a flourishing trade in devotional objects. Particularly popular were woodcuts depicting the saints. Woodcut is one of the earliest printing techniques, but it only reached Europe in the early Middle Ages.
There is a huge fundraising deadline coming up for Senate Democrats, and they need your help right now.
Here it served primarily for the dissemination of pictures and texts. But cutting these whole-page blocks is a time-consuming process. First, a mirror image of the handwritten page has to be drawn on the block. Then the individual letters have to be carved out. Finally, the block is inked in, and the sheet of paper is laid on top and rubbed hard with a bone tool so that it takes up the ink. By the start of the 15th century, more and more of these page prints were coming onto the market. Occasionally, a number of pages were bound into a book. The trade in these books also gave a boost to manuscript production. Manuscripts had long since ceased to be the exclusive preserve of the monasteries. Secular scribes were doing good business. The establishment of the first universities had created a great demand for books. Libraries were founded, making knowledge in the form of books accessible. Books needed to be cheaper and more quickly available. But that wasn't all. In particular, scholars wanted uniform copies. A new production technique was feverishly sought after. And one of the seekers was Gutenberg. In 1446, he returned to Mainz. Here, he found solid financial backers, allowing him to go ahead with his enterprise. His breakthrough came with a brilliant idea. He broke up his text into its constituent parts: letters, punctuation marks, and frequent combinations known as ligatures. These were then combined to form the blocks for printing words, lines, and pages. The characters were cast and could be used in new combinations time and again. A character is produced as follows. On the end of a metal rod, a mirror image of the letter is engraved. This is then pushed into softened copper, producing a pit in the shape of the letter. This matrix, as it's called, acts as the mold for the actual type, which is cast from lead. In order to manufacture the many letters needed quickly and in sufficient quantity, Gutenberg took another important step forward, inventing the hand casting instrument. It consists of a rectangular channel. The matrix is inserted at one end and molten lead poured into the other. When the instrument is opened, a letter cast in lead is there, ready to be used. As the matrix is reusable, an unlimited number of identical letters can be cast. Finally, the typesetter can begin to combine the letters into lines. In the form, the lines or columns are combined to create the page layout as desired. The result is a mirror image of the page to be printed. The form is now inked in with printer's ink. Gutenberg used a mixture of lampblack varnish and egg white. Printing can now start. Gutenberg used a special press for this purpose, but he derived the principle from the traditional wine press.
This is why we call it the press. You put the paper on the plate, ink it up, you put ink on the plate, put the paper on it, and then you pull it and press it. This arm is called the printer's devil, and it presses the paper onto the plate. And that is why we call it the press today.
Gutenberg's first printed works were official documents, papal decrees, and grammars.
Notice it's in Latin.
But soon he started on a mammoth venture, the Latin Bible. For this project, he cast more than 100,000 pieces of type. For more than 2 years, Gutenberg's typesetters and printers worked on the first edition of 180 copies.
And I saw one in New York City. They're still around.
The text was printed in black letter or Gothic type, based on the handwriting of the day. Finally, the illuminator added the colored initials and drawings. With his Bible, one of the world's most beautiful printed books, Gutenberg proved that a work printed with movable type could be as aesthetically pleasing as one written by hand.
And they made hundreds of them.
The edition was soon sold out. Gutenberg's contemporaries were impressed. It was the first time a work had been available in such a large edition, and every copy was identical. The written word now had authoritative status.
And the fact that it was identical also made this the first manufacturing. This is the first time that, before this, everything was handmade. The first thing ever manufactured in the history of the universe is ideas. It's the Bible. It's words. So that's also a big deal.
Knowledge of this revolutionary technology was quick to spread.
Yes.
Soon, the first printing presses were set up in Cologne, Bamberg, and Basel. In Venice, an enterprising publisher named Aldus Manutius began to print the works of the classical authors.
Mm-hmm.
His clientele comprised the whole of Europe's humanistic intellectual elite. Manutius employed the most talented printers of the age. They developed the typeface known as Antiqua, which soon spread throughout Europe. "20 years after Gutenberg's invention, the new technology was firmly established. Thousands of titles were marketed in editions of up to 1,000. Books now became affordable for ordinary people. As society grew more literate, the number of potential readers increased.
Also different ideas.
One of Gutenberg's greatest admirers was the reformer Martin Luther. The new art of printing gave him a bright and bold idea. The layman didn't need a priest to tell him what the Bible said. He could read it himself.
Huge. That you could have your own ideas. You don't need the church to tell you. You could be, as Luther said, a free moral agent. The idea, which came from the Greeks, the idea of demos and democracy, that the people can rule, that we had forgotten about, came back from the Crusades and then into universities and then into the church itself.
And decide for himself between revealed truth and the false interpretation put about by the church.
Big time.
So Luther had more than 500,000 copies of his German translation of the Bible printed, a huge number for those days. And to disseminate his Protestant message, he had hundreds of thousands of leaflets distributed.
Saying, I'm sorry, the Pope don't have it. The people do.
But it wasn't just Luther who exploited the new medium. So did the emperor, along with kings and free cities of the empire. Soon, single-sheet leaflets, flyers we would call them, were discovered as a news medium.
Yep.
When an unusual configuration of planets was announced for 1524, the country faced an avalanche of these flyers, warning of an imminent repeat of Noah's flood. The first daily newspaper appeared in Leipzig in 1650. Einkommende Zeitungen it was called, roughly breaking news, and it came out 6 days a week. But the triumphal march of the newspaper did not really begin until steam-powered rotary printing presses appeared in the 19th century.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
And the offset process ushered in a radical transformation of printing technology. Now the printing and non-printing elements are part of a single continuous surface. First, the page to be printed is transferred by exposure to light onto a thin.
We don't need that today, but you can see what a difference it all made. That all of a sudden you can have your own ideas and you don't have to listen to the king anymore. You can look at this video at another time. Historical effects. Okay, we'll go back. Things that we got. That's true. Yep, we saw that. But still very limited. We saw that. And you see how that works. First book was the Bible in Latin. And there's a picture of it. They still have them around. This is the one that I actually saw at the Morgan Library in New York City. Yep. We'll get to that. Controlling it through licenses. This is what happened in England. Soon as the printing started, the king said, you need a license to run a printing press. And if I don't like what you say, I'll pull your license. And the idea of government control of the press has been with us since almost the beginning of the printing press. At what point does the government control ideas? Who decides what a dangerous idea is? We're still wrestling with that one. Yes, Gutenberg started printing in German. Caxton started printing in English. And once it's in English, everybody's reading the same language. And if you're reading the same language, be it Spanish, French, or English, you start thinking of yourself not as someone who lives in a village, but someone who is defined by what you read, someone who is German or French or English. The idea of a national identity came from the printing press. Literacy, dangerous. Schools, dangerous. National identity, I just mentioned. Regular folks had access to information. Yes. Critical thinking, which the church did not like. There you go. The Protestant Reformation. There were reformers before that, but they were burned at the stake. But if everybody read the 95 Theses of Luther and his Bible, they see differences. Scientific knowledge, Galileo, that we're not the center of the universe. Newton. Yes. Machiavelli. Copernicus, who was a priest, figured out that the earth revolves around the sun. He didn't publish his work until after he died. René Descartes, I am a human being. I think, therefore I am. I'm not just an agent of the church. This is big stuff. Again, individualism. Yes. Yes. And we're still wrestling with this one. How much democracy do you want? All from some German guy who printed Bibles. We'll move the scene to England and the Americas next time. And next week, we'll get to this whole free speech thing and why it happened here. Interesting stuff, short presentation, short little one question test on Thursday I'll post. I will post this presentation shortly. And that's how a bill becomes a law. Anyway, I appreciate you all. And any questions? Any questions on any of the stuff? I will have your stuff graded by the end of the week. So,
what would how many have you gotten through? Like, do you know an approximate average score yet?
Average score is probably a B plus. Actually, the most common one was a 9. There's more A's than anything. I'll put it that way. It's the zeros that bring down the average.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, no. It's more A's than anything. No, this will help. All right, other stuff.
Will there be any extra credit this week?
Yeah, I call it the 1 credit quiz. I call it extra credit because it's easy to throw that out there. But some people say, but still, if I miss it, I don't get the points. So I call it extra credit because it should be easy. Some people are uncomfortable with that term because it's possible to still lose points. So it'll be a 5-point extra credit thingy. And I'll post that on Thursday. It'll either come from this video or the Thursday video. I haven't decided yet. Other stuff. Okay, docs. I will post this probably by this evening for those of you who aren't here. This format works for me. I'm enjoying it. I hope you are. And we're learning things. You guys are doing really good. I enjoy the essay. Someone asked about the hipster dog park on Main Street. Where's my hipster dog? Hello, hipster dog. She came in. Hipster dog on Main Street. Hello, hipster dog. They serve beer and all sorts of, it's on Main Street, so it's where all the hipsters hang out. But anyway, so that's what I'll do this evening, excitement. Anyway, I enjoy it, I enjoy you, and we will see you next time. I appreciate it, y'all.
Thank you.